thanks a lot for being on time, for joining us at this webinar on the Polaris series, specifically to talk about the small business and the women-owned small business release that just took place last month. So we're really excited about to spend this afternoon here with you. It's going to be a short webinar. I'm trying to make it really concise because I know that everybody wants to get back to work, but just want to make sure we go through the changes mostly on what the solicitation was, where we are today, and then just basically have a good Q&A session. So key takeaways, for the presentation today is actually just making sure that you will understand the fact that some hurdles have been removed, for the small businesses. As well, the point matrix has been changed, and so it's reflecting the new rules, for joining, participating on joint ventures and the likes. And then the fact that we do have some mentor protege joint ventures rules that have been changed, and they have actually just raised some eyebrows, to say the least, out in the marketplace. So we're just going to be covering those. So those are the three main takeaways for the presentation today. The webinar, sponsored by Trident Proposal Services, is a small disadvantaged and veteran-owned small business founded in 2008, specializing on capturing proposals. So anything from market management to capture management, proposal management, and coaching. That's what Trident does. And part of our services is to make sure that we help out our audience, our customers, and our prospects to actually just learn what's going on in the marketplace. And so that's why we're offering this particular series. Myself, I'm Nelson Santin. I'm one of the SMEs related to capture and proposal management. I've been doing this for about 25 years with Trident for the last 4 or so. They were actually just, was actually one of their clients, decided to join them, to offer their services. So any questions that you have for me after the presentation, please feel free to hit me up at nelson@tridentproposals.com. So briefly, the agenda as we move through it today, we're going to hit the timeline changes for Polaris. Then after that, we're going to talk about the changes. We're going to touch on the scoring. And then at the last moment, we're going to talk about the protest that we had actually as the solicitation was let open, okay? Then after that, we're going to touch some wave tops, Q&A on small business and women-owned small business topics. And after that, we'll close up with a random Q&A session for everybody. If you have any questions, I'll try to make sure that I hit them up. Make sure you write them on the chat, and I'll just get back to you on those questions as we get to the Q&A session towards the bottom of the hour. All right, so that's my cover slide, just introducing me, and let's get started. Talking about the timeline, some key elements to understand as far as Polaris, and this is specifically to the small business and the woman-owned small business. The questions are due on the 18th of April, so not this coming Monday, but the Monday thereafter. Questions are due, and then the next major deadline is the 13th of May. As we all know, no solicitation ever presented by the government has been delayed or moved back, so those are written in stone. Not really. But again, those are the major deadlines for right now. So the 18th of April for questions, so that's about 2 weeks. And then the 13th of May is actually the deadline for submission. In addition to that deadline, the last intel that we have is actually that the next release is actually for the veteran-owned small business and for the hub zone groups, and that's going to be on Q4 fiscal year 2022. And knowing the government, it would not be unreasonable to expect that that would be released like a week before the end of the fiscal year. But it's right now slated for Q4 fiscal year 2022. If we have any updates, we'll make sure that we broadcast that to everybody in the distribution. Moving right along, let's just basically talk about the changes. And so one of the major changes that came into the solicitation as it was let out is the fact that there are no restrictions now on the number of relevant experience projects that can be actually just considered under a mentor protege joint venture. So big change here is that before you could only use one project, and then that project would be used for one particular relationship. Now there are no restrictions on the number of relevant experience projects that you can use. So this is actually one of those little changes that when we get to the section of the current protest, there's actually has raised some eyebrows to be raised. So that's change number one. Related to the same, but in a different slight color, is the fact that now letters of commitment can specify which projects are going to be used for which tool. So if you have a mentor-protege relationship and your mentor is actually just collaborating with somebody else, by letter of commitment, you can clarify specifically what project, what past performance is being used for which particular member of the mentor-protege or JV relationship. So that's, again, change number two. Before it was one project and that was it. Now you can actually use multiple projects, and you can actually just declare clearly, to which joint venture that project, will apply. Uh, Next question or next change. Again, the joint venture may utilize the highest clearance possessed by any member. And again, this is actually going back to what the elements of the protest were, which is, hey, if we actually have a mentor protege joint venture, and that's how we're going to basically do some point scoring, it's going to basically be unfair for the small businesses. But the latest change basically allows the small business team to actually just leverage the clearance that the mentor actually has as part of the qualifications. And so this is actually one of the other changes. So you can see how this mentor protege relationship has actually just made a big change in how actually the points are going to be awarded. And we're going to get that in the next segment over here. Lastly, on the changes, I think we have one more change after this, but this one is related to cost reimbursements. And so you can prove these through your FPDS or the contract award documentation. So they're trying to give some flexibility. There's some give and take as far as how the solicitation is being put together. So one of the changes related to flexibility is the fact that now you can use for your cost plus, cost reimbursable, the federal procurement data system and or the contract award documentation. And then there are two elements that are kind of like easing off on the restrictions. One of them is related to your risk assessment language. So that has been amended and is just basically to reflect the relationship with a mentor protege and also the joint venture. So this is, again, a reflection or a cascading effect. So the relationship on the MPJVs was changed. The language around the risk assessment was changed as well. And then the last one that is actually on the changes is actually related to the cybersecurity and the scram assessment, were both removed from the solicitation. And the intel that we have and what we perceive is the fact that these are going to be introduced at the task order level. So it's not to say that cybersecurity is not going to play a role, but it is actually to say that instead of actually just doing globally, these are going to be considered at the task order level. I think that this is actually the last of the major changes that we've noticed on the solicitation. And so I'm just going to do a quick pause and scan and see if in the comments there are any particular questions. I hope that you can hear me well and that you followed along. And by the way, these slides are going to be available to you shortly after this presentation. Once we basically get the list of attendees, we'll send you a link so you guys can download the presentation and also have a video playback of what we're discussing in here. So moving right along, and then just going to the next set of changes is related to scoring. And so in the scoring, we had a total of 100,000 points on the previous scoring card, if you will. And now that basically it has gone down to 95K points. So it's a deduction of 5,000 points. It's all relative in the scale. It's not that you have basically just you're starting in the hole. It's just that the total scale went from 100,000 points to 95,000 points. And so what we're going to do is we're going to show you where those changes happen in the brushes. So you guys can go back to those sections and basically we'll discuss a little bit of what those implications are. So the first one is actually in section L52. And so we've gone through making sure we can tag those so you can go back and reference them on the solicitation. But on volume 2, related to relevant experience, before you could only get 3,450 by project. Now basically it has gone out to be about 4,000 per project. So because you can select 5, the section has gone from 17 and change to actually 20,000 points per this section. So now you basically have an increase of 2,750 points that you can add to the to your scorecard. So main point in here is, again, look for the best cases, look for your best relevant experience, the one that applies the most, and understand that now you basically can make up for some points in here that before were basically capped at 3,450 per case. So now, good place to make up some points. The next one here is actually just not a big increase, but all the same is an increase of about 1,000 points. So one of those things that is low-hanging fruit, let's not leave them alone. It's in section L5228, and it's actually just by the NAICS and the breadth of relevant experience. Before it was 5,000 for Series 4 and 8,000 for Series 5. It has gone up to 6,000 and 9,000 respectively. So it's a net increase, of 1,000 points maximum per this section. So not a big deal, but when you are actually just competing against others, this is actually a good place to make sure that you can get up, those additional 1,000 points as you go through your scoring. And the next one, and I'm talking about the scoring piece on the past performance, the section was capped at 15,750. Now it's basically capped at 20,000 points. So this is a substantial change in points. It's actually more than 5% of your scoring, where you can actually just add into your past performance. And so when you bring this past performance, whether it's yours or the past performance of your mentor protege, if you have one or you're into a JV, this is a good place for you to actually just make up additional points. Again, more than 5%, if you're looking at the scale, we went from 100,000 to 95K, 40 to 50 is a substantial change, and it makes a difference, right? So a good place for you to make up the additional points. On the accounting system, this was an interesting one. So before, you have to have the CAS and have an audit information, and they were going to award you a maximum of 4,000 points. And again, this is under section L541. Now you have a maximum of 3,000 points, but it's an either or. So if you go through CPA certification, you can get a maximum of 750 points. If you go and basically certify yourself or certify using DCA or DCMA, the maximum you can get is 3,000 points. So the moral of the story here is we went from 4,000 to a maximum of 3,000, but the government is relaxing the way that you can get yourself certified for your accounting system. And again, if you go through a CPA, you can get up to 750 points. That's actually just a big punch in the gut if that's actually the best that you can do. So strongly recommend, master of the obvious, that you actually just go through the DCAA or the DCMA, because you can get up a total of 3,000 points in this one as you move on forward. So again, this is one of those places where the total number of points went down, and it behooves the teams to make sure that you can get yourself certified through DCAA or DCMA so you can maximize your points. Then we have on section L551 on the organizational risk assessment, the old maximum points was 8,500, now it went down to 5,000. So this was an area that was reduced by 3,500 points. So again, on your risk assessment, good news, if you will, is the fact that you cannot, you can only make up so many points, but you can actually just, make up those points on the other tools and the other elements that have been relaxed. So when you're looking at the net, it was a total loss of 5,000 points. This is actually just making the brunt of it. So again, on risk assessment, make sure you dig into the solicitation and find out, how you can make up the points so you can make the most out of the 5,000 now that are awarded in here, whereas before we had a cap of 8,500. And the last piece is on section L552, which is limitations on subcontracting and compliance. Before, it used to be 8,500 points. On the woman-owned small business, actually just went down to 0. So no points on subcontracting compliance for the woman-owned small businesses. That's not the case for the straight-up small businesses. So again, it's a deduction of 8,500 points. Again, that you can make up in some other area. So this is one of those places where the government took away a block of 8,500 points and now has allotted those points elsewhere into the solicitation. But it does hurt actually the woman-owned small businesses as far as the total points on this area. So that's actually the last slide that I have related to the scoring. And so in a very high point, we've gone through the major changes in the solicitation and also on the points. And so I'm going to hit a real, small pause button here just to see if we have any questions on the chat. And I'll just give a moment here just to see if we have any questions. And I'll just move along, because I see no questions. But the next is actually, saying it's the next and last point in the agenda, which is just to talk briefly about the current process. And in case you have not seen the protest itself, but there is actually an active protest against Polaris, came from BD Squared. And the essence of the protest is something that is not new. This has happened before in other solicitations. I've been impacted myself in previous lives where I've been actually just entering into these kind of GWACs. And it is that one entity feels in this particular case is BD Squared, feels the fact that because they're actually the relationship between mentor protege and joint ventures has been relaxed, it just basically gonna tilt and cause some disadvantage. It's gonna create some problems and challenges related to the scoring, right? So this is one of those places where the government has relaxed to allow other small companies to participate, on the MPJV relationship. But because we can actually just, some entities can draw from the mentor to actually just complete their profile, this is gonna seems to be an unfair advantage. And that's actually the case that BD Squared is actually just pulling out there. So we have no official opinion of it. We're just basically just informing what the situation is and what the protesting is. From our perspective, the only advice that we can give is, number one, is follow the news to make sure you can actually follow what's going on with the protest and focus on making sure that whatever small business past performance you can actually just bring forth, that you actually stay focused on. And this is one of those things that is a little bit out of our hands on what the government is going to do as far as the protest, but it's already active. And it's not surprising that these and other protests will happen. This is just fairly normal in the life cycle of a GWAC. So already one in play, and it was shortly after the solicitation was let. So I just giving you here the link. If you want to read a good article about it, it's Jason Miller from Fed News Network. He basically just goes out in fair amount of detail as far as everything that was in the complaint. And so this is actually kind of like the summary that I wanted to present for you today. Again, wanted to be really brief and to the point on where the changes were. Again, on the solicitation, B on the matrix, and C really just to touch home base on the protest. So having said that, I am going to look again onto the chats and to the questions to make sure that there are no questions that we have missed. So this is actually the point to actually just ask me any questions that you may have or topics that I have not covered, so that I can take some lookups and then send them out to you as far as research. Glad to help with that. So any particular questions from the room? I'll be looking here at the chat box to see if there's anything. I don't see anything coming up. That's all that I have for today, for this particular webinar. I do appreciate you joining us. If you have a suggestion about the format, if you have a suggestion as far as the content, please make sure you hit me up again, Nelson@tridentproposals.com. Otherwise, I'll just hang around to see if there are any more questions, and then we'll just close up the business. You're welcome, to everybody. Thanks, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Any more questions? Last call. No? Outstanding. Well, everybody have a great day. Thanks so much. Nelson Santini out from Trident Proposals.